As Rabbi Megdal said earlier, today is Shabbat Hagadol, and the custom is to talk about the intricacies and the complications of how to observe Pesach, which is difficult and has so many different things. Actually, last Shabbat, I talked about how the calendar was a little different. The fast of the firstborn was last Thursday because it normally would have been this morning to today, except you can't fast on Shabbat. So you would think it would have moved to Friday, but you can't fast going into Shabbat either. And so that was Thursday. But that was last week's sermon. And I was so glad. It's always so good this week to see family has arrived for the Sidarim, or family, other Bethel families have gone. So as I was just saying hello to Ben Topol, who is down from Brandeis University, he's like, I really expect you to say something inspiring for the Seder tonight. Thank you, Ben, for, setting the bar very high. So you'll tell me afterwards how inspiring or interesting this was. But what I want to focus on this morning is how we finish the Seder. We finish the Seder. Next year, let us be in a rebuilt Jerusalem or a built Jerusalem. L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim habenuya. That this is how we conclude the Seder tonight, and I want to talk about that, and you may bring it into comments tonight. So where did the phrase come from? Now, why do we end the Seder on that? Let's start with the obvious question. Why is it here? So I found an article from Dr. Sarit Katan Gribitz, I believe her name. That would be really Jewish if it was like food related, Grivenitz, right? But she's an associate professor in Jewish studies at Yale. And she writes this, that in a poem for the conclusion of Yom Kippur, the 12th century poet Yehuda Halevi, asks God as the sun sets and the day wraps up to forgive Israel and assist those who are suffering. He ends the stanza with the hopeful phrase, next year in Jerusalem. For Halevi, traveling to Jerusalem was more than a poetic fantasy. He desperately wanted to be in the city, writing to his friend Halfon Halevi that I have no secret wish, only the open one that I made plain to you and that I laid out before your lofty presence to go eastward as soon as possible, if God will grant me assistance. Halevi's desire to travel to Zion was indeed no secret. Anyone who reads his writings learns how deeply he felt this urge, declaring most famously, my heart is in the east, but the rest of me is far in the west. So this wish for Jerusalem emerged out of a long tradition of Jewish longing to return from exile, she writes. It also developed within Halevi's own contemporary context, including the First Crusade and its aftermath, which prompted communities of Christian, Muslims, and Jews to renew their attachment to Jerusalem and enliven their imagination about it. So later, in the same poem, in which Halevi declared that his heart was in the east, he refers to the Crusader Jerusalem explicitly. He writes, how in the bonds of the Moor, Zion chained to the cross, can I do what I've vowed to and must? Halevi's poetic phrase, next year in Jerusalem, is one of the very earliest instances of an extant Jewish source. It's one of the earliest sources that we have of that phrase is his poem. And a variation of in Jerusalem next year appears in an 11th century piyut for Shabbat Hagadol, today, composed by the French rabbi Joseph ben Samuel Bonfils, known in Hebrew as Yosef Tuv Elm, attested to in the Ashkenazi Machzorim throughout the modern period. So now we know how that phrase kind of emerged centuries ago, but not super long ago in Jewish terms, of next year in Jerusalem. And we know that it is even more ancient than that, because in Psalms, in many, many Psalms, that it is expressed the desire for Jerusalem to be rebuilt. In Psalm 147 that we recited earlier today, hallelujah, it is good to chant hymns to our God. It is pleasant to sing glorious praise. The Lord rebuilds Jerusalem. God gathers in the exiles of Israel. God heals the broken hearts and binds up their wounds. So this desire and image of going to Jerusalem is ancient. And it's also very modern because, of course, Hatikva ends Liotam choshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim, to be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. But in the spirit of the simple child, let me ask, mazot, and what is this? I'm interested in what this means now that we end the Seder with this phrase, and what does it mean to us now in the midst of the second Passover at war? It is day 554. The simple explanation is that it fits within the narrative structure of the Passover Seder. From slavery to freedom to redemption, that is the narrative arc of the Seder. We move from slaves to freedom to the aspirational messianic times. That third part may seem unfamiliar, but the essence of opening the door to invite Elijah in, that is the part. That's the messianic part. And we are hopeful that the messenger of the Messiah will appear, Elijah. On Thursday, I taught how maybe Elijah fell into the Haggadah story by accident, but now it is a full part of the Haggadah and our telling of it. From slavery to freedom to redemption is also seen by singing Hallel after Shulchan Aruch, after the meal. It surprised me that there was any part after the meal, because growing up, my dad sort of was like, that's the end. But as I journeyed on my Jewish journey, there certainly is a lot of beauty and insight after the meal as well. And the redemptive part climaxes with the hope of being in Jerusalem next year. Note that it is not this year or now. It is aspirational that at some point in the future, in the next year, we will be restored in Jerusalem. So mazot, what does this mean? And I want to suggest a few options, and I know that there are many more. But the first is, maybe this is not talking about the literal city as we know today. It is not talking about the modern municipality of Jerusalem with the shops on Emek Raphaim and my favorite bakery, Lechem Shel Tomer, or the city divided by its own internal strife of Orthodox and secular Jews, Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, ancient times and modern times. Maybe it is speaking of a time in the future in which the city of Jerusalem will be its best self. It will be a place which lives up to the dreams of the psalmist and our ancestors. Maybe L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim is aspirational of the city being its best self because it is not yet. Another idea for others, it may be the literal meaning. Next year in Jerusalem could mean next year actually in Jerusalem. And maybe this is a commitment that you make to make a pilgrimage like the ancient Israelites on the Shlosh Regalim, to visit Jerusalem. Not to move there, but to visit so that we remain grounded in who we are as a people. The Jewish people have many diverse things, and Jerusalem as a concept and as a physical place has been the center of the spokes for all of who we are. In Isaiah, and it is part of the Torah service, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah udavar Adonai mirushalayim. For out of Zion shall the Torah come forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So the second option is that we will go to Jerusalem. And let me tell you, I am ready to go. So let Rabbi Magdal, myself, the Chazan know about the next Bethel trip. We are ready to do it if we can get a group together. And the third idea is more of the grand concept of the Messianic period, where it is not just Jerusalem being its better self, but symbolic of the transformation of the world. The Messianic period. Maybe it's not about the city of Jerusalem, but the concept and the dream of the city. So let me read this to you, and we can reflect on this. So it's 1978. Most of you were alive in 1978. So, not you. I will speak slowly then. It is part of the speech that Natan Sharansky gave to the court before he was sentenced to prison as a refusenik. It is a powerful and inspiring talk in so many ways. So Sharansky says this, and just imagine in the court, like all of the pressures and moments in the world watching him, and this is what he chooses to say. From the start of my investigation, he says, the heads of the KGB told me often that given my position with regard to this case, I would receive either capital punishment or at best 15 years of imprisonment. They promised that if I changed my mind and cooperated with them in their struggle against Jewish activists and dissidents, I would receive a short symbolic sentence and the opportunity to join my wife in Israel. But I did not change my position either during the investigation or at the trial, and yesterday the prosecution demanded that I be sentenced to a term of 15 years. 5 years ago, I applied for an exit visa to emigrate from the USSR to Israel. Today, I am further than ever from my goal. That would seem to be the cause for regret, but that is not the case. These 5 years were the best of my life, Sharansky says. I am happy that I have been able to live them honestly and at peace with my conscience. I have said only what I believed and have not violated my conscience even when my life was in danger. I am also happy that I've been able to help many people who needed help and who turned to me. I am proud that I came to know and work with such people as Andrei Sakharov, Yuri Orlov, and Alexander Ginsburg, who are carrying on the best traditions of the Russian intelligentsia. But most of all, I feel part of a marvelous historical process. The process of the national revival of Soviet Jewry and its return to the homeland, to Israel. I hope that the false and absurd but terribly serious charges made today against me and the entire Jewish people will not impede the process of the national revival of the Jews of Russia, as the KGB has assured me they would, but will actually provide a new impulse, as has often happened in our history. My relatives, he continues, and friends know how strong was my desire to join my wife in Israel, and with what joy at any moment I would have exchanged my so-called fame as a Jewish activist, for which the charge asserts I was striving, for a visa to Israel. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people, my people, have been dispersed all over the world and seemingly deprived of any hope of returning. But still, each year, Jews have stubbornly and apparently without reason said to each other, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And today, when I am further than ever from my dream, from my people, and from my Avital, and when difficult years of prisons and camps lay ahead of me, I say to my wife and to my people, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, and to the court, which has only to read a sentence that was prepared long ago, to you, I have nothing to say. Thoughts?
I didn't know that part of his history. I give him a ton of credit for sticking to his principles no matter what. That's very, very hard to do under those circumstances.
Yeah. That's sticking to his principles. As he is in that courtroom facing years of hardship ahead of him, of choosing to make this statement next year in Jerusalem, what a difference 1978 to 2025 makes. Today, I fear that next year in Jerusalem is being said by Jews having anti-Zionist seders. I fear they're calling for a conquest and fall of Jerusalem next year. For too many, Jerusalem has become a shame of their Jewish identity rather than a point of hope of their dreams. As examples, Jewish Voices for Peace is hosting a national Exodus from Zionism Seder. A group called the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, IJAN, has available it's titled Legacies of Resistance and Anti-Zionist Haggadah for a Liberation Seder. For me, when we say next year in Jerusalem tonight, my intention will be for a transformation of the world in that messianic sense. It will be a hope that Jerusalem and all of its people, Jews and Christians and Armenians, Palestinians and Mormons and Arabs and secular Mizrahi and East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem will make peace. It will be hopeful for what can be and sad that it has not yet happened. When I say next year in Jerusalem tonight, it will also be practical. I hope to actually go to Jerusalem, to walk her streets and smell her sweetness. And it is a modern city, so you can smell garbage piles too. Stray cats are everywhere. But as Psalm 48 says, I pray to walk around Zion, to circle it, to count its towers, take note of its ramparts, go through its citadels, that you may recount it to a future age. Today, as you give final preparation to the Seder tonight, think about what this will mean to you and the group around your table. Next year in Jerusalem, as the simple child asks, Mazot, what is this? Let us be open and loving enough to hear from everyone around the table. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Kasher v'Sameach.